There's a weapon the United States cannot see, not on a satellite image, not on a radar screen, not in a diplomat's briefcase. It does not fire a bullet. It does not drop a bomb. But it has quietly changed the balance of power on every continent that matters. And the most frightening part? The US tried to stop it, sanctioned it, blacklisted the companies behind it, pressured the countries receiving it, and it kept moving anyway, piece by piece, launcher by launcher, missile by missile, silently spreading across the globe like roots beneath the ground. This is the story of Beijing's invisible shield, and by the time you finish watching this, you will understand why the smartest military analysts in Washington are losing sleep over it. Let us go back to where this story truly begins. In the 1980s, China had a problem. A massive, embarrassing, dangerous problem. The People's Liberation Army, one of the largest armies on Earth, had air defenses that were decades behind. They were using old Soviet-era systems, clunky leftovers from a Cold War that was already ending. And they knew it. American fighter jets were becoming smarter, faster, more invisible. Cruise missiles were becoming deadlier. And Beijing looked at its own sky and realized, if war came, that sky was wide open. So China launched a secret program. They called it Project 9. The goal was simple but enormous. Build a long-range air defense missile system from scratch. One that could match, or even beat, the best systems the West and Russia had. One that could track aircraft 350 kilometers away. One that could shoot down cruise missiles, fighter jets, even ballistic missiles. They called the result the HQ-9, Hong Qi, red flag. And that name matters, because every decision Beijing has made in the last 40 years has been about planting that red flag, not just over its own cities, but across the world. The HQ-9 took years to develop. It was not a clean or proud process. Intelligence reports and think tank analyses confirm what defense experts have long suspected. China did not build this system entirely on its own. They studied, they copied, they reverse engineered. In the 1990s, China purchased Russia's S-300 air defense system. And according to multiple defense analyses, including a detailed report from the Center for European Policy Analysis published in June 2025, Moscow itself allowed Beijing to acquire advanced air defense technologies. China then took what it learned and built something new, something that was part Russian, part American in concept, and entirely Chinese in ambition. Defense analysts have pointed out that the HQ-9 likely incorporated design elements inspired by multiple foreign systems, refined through decades of Chinese military-industrial development. By the time the HQ-9 appeared in public, rolled out in a Beijing military parade in 2009, it was already a serious machine. Its radar, the HT-233 phased array system, could track up to 100 airborne targets at the same time and engage more than 50 simultaneously. Its missiles could fly out to 125 kilometers in early versions, and that range kept growing with every upgrade. The HQ-9B pushed that range to 250 kilometers, and the latest version, the HQ-9C, reportedly reaches targets 400 kilometers away. That is almost the distance from New York City to Boston, covered in the time it takes you to blink twice. But here is what makes the HQ-9 truly dangerous. It is not just the missile, it is the mind behind it. Every HQ-9 battery is a complete fighting system. It moves on trucks. 8 vehicles, all mobile, all connected, all talking to each other in real time. You cannot bomb a fixed base and call it done. The moment a threat appears, the entire battery can drive away, relocate, and be operational again in minutes. The missiles launch cold, shot into the air before the rocket ignites, which means they can fire in any direction without the launcher itself pointing at the target. This is not a defensive toy. This is a precision weapon built to survive and kill in the middle of a modern air campaign. And Beijing put it everywhere. Right now, as you watch this, HQ-9 batteries are deployed across Beijing, protecting the capital. They are in Tibet and Xinjiang, China's most politically sensitive territories. They are on artificial islands in the South China Sea, sitting on runways and fortified pads that China built from nothing in the middle of disputed waters. Satellite images confirmed HQ-9 launchers on Yongqing Island back in 2016. By 2023, those images showed hardened facilities with retractable roofs, like fortresses, on Fiery Cross Reef, Mischief Reef, and Subi Reef. China did not put air defenses on those islands because it was afraid of seagulls. It put them there to tell every navy in the Pacific. This ocean has a roof now, and we built it. But the real story, the story that Washington cannot figure out how to answer, is not what China has built for itself. It is what China started selling to everyone else. The export version of the HQ-9 is called the FD-2000. Russia's S-400 is similarly expensive, and it comes with the political weight of buying weapons from a country under Western sanctions. The FD-2000, cheaper, significantly cheaper, and it comes with something neither the US nor Russia offers. No political strings, no human rights conditions, no democratic requirements. You buy it, you get it. That is the deal. And countries lined up. Turkmenistan got it. Uzbekistan got it. Morocco bought 4 batteries of the FD-2000B in 2016. These are not headline-grabbing names, but that is exactly the point. This network was being built in places no one was watching closely. And then came the deals that changed everything. Pakistan. This is where the HQ-9 story gets complicated and honest and important. Pakistan first confirmed its purchase of the HQ-9 in a version customized for Islamabad called the HQ-9P back in 2015. But the deal was not finalized, and the system only officially entered service in October 2021. Pakistan upgraded it in 2024. And then, in May 2025, war came. The India-Pakistan conflict, a brief but brutal 4 days that shook the region, became the first real battlefield test for the HQ-9 against a peer opponent. The results were not what Beijing had promised. Pakistan stationed its HQ-9B batteries at high-priority sites near Lahore and Sialkot, its most important cities. India's air campaign targeted those sites, and according to multiple reports, including a detailed analysis published by the National Interest in December 2025, Pakistan's HQ-9Bs failed to intercept a single Indian missile, drone, or loitering munition throughout the conflict. Not one. The system that Beijing had marketed as equivalent to the S-400, a cheaper but equally capable alternative, was outperformed by India's actual Russian-made S-400s at every stage of the fight. Pakistan did not even have enough batteries to cover its critical zones, between 12 and 18 launchers total, compared to India's more than 40 S-400 launchers. When those Chinese-supplied defenses went quiet, India exploited the gaps directly. The Chinese predictably blamed the Pakistanis. Poor training, they said, insufficient preparation. But Pakistan's own military analysts and independent observers noted that the HQ-9Bs could not even stop slow-moving drones. That is not a training problem. That is a technology problem. Pakistan's confidence in Chinese air defense collapsed almost overnight. Islamabad began looking at Turkey's Cyper system as a possible replacement. They also quietly raised the idea of China's newer, more advanced HQ-19, though some analysts read that as a face-saving gesture to keep Beijing happy while Islamabad hunted for better options. This was a real setback for China's defense export ambitions. A weapon is only worth buying if it works in combat. The HQ-9B failed its biggest test, and the world was watching. But here is what makes Beijing's strategy so much more sophisticated than a simple arms sale. China did not give up. It did not retreat. It adapted. Because China was not just selling weapons. It was building something far larger, something invisible, a web of dependency, of alliance, of technical integration that would eventually become impossible to untangle, regardless of whether the missiles hit their targets. Look at what happened in Iran, and pay close attention, because this is where the invisible pact becomes fully visible. Iran entered 2025 badly wounded. In June 2025, Israel launched what became known as the 12-Day War, a precision air campaign that targeted Iranian military infrastructure with devastating effect. Israeli strikes destroyed major Iranian missile production centers. They degraded radar coverage. They punched holes in interceptor stockpiles that Iran had spent a decade building. When the smoke cleared, Tehran looked at its air defense network and saw ruins. Russia, Iran's longtime arms supplier, could not help. Moscow was tied up in Ukraine, strained by sanctions, and unwilling to accelerate deliveries of the S-400 system it had been promising Tehran for years. So Iran turned to the only partner left, China. What happened next is documented in a November 2025 report by Dryad Global, a respected maritime intelligence firm. China supplied HQ-9B variants to Iran, specifically designed for interoperability with Iran's existing Russian S-300 systems. This was not a random sale. This was engineering. Beijing did not just hand Iran a weapon. It designed that weapon to plug directly into Iran's existing defense architecture, creating a combined Chinese-Russian network that neither Moscow nor Washington fully controls. And the payment method? This is where it gets truly remarkable. Iran's oil exports run between 1.5 and 2 million barrels per day. Roughly 80 to 90% of those exports flow directly to China. That generates somewhere between 53 and 54 billion US dollars per year, flowing from Tehran into Chinese hands. In October 2025, according to the Dryad Global Report, negotiations between Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps and Chinese entities explicitly linked crude oil shipments to weapon supplies, oil for missiles, energy for air defense. Tehran pumps its most valuable natural resource directly to Beijing, and Beijing sends back the tools Iran needs to survive the next air campaign. This is not a secret arms deal. This is a structural relationship, a permanent loop. Iran cannot stop sending oil to China. It needs the money. China will not stop sending weapons to Iran. It needs the oil and the strategic influence. And both countries benefit from a relationship that the United States has spent decades trying to sanction into oblivion. The US has sanctioned CPMIEC, the Chinese company that makes the HQ-9, multiple times, going back to 2006. The Treasury Department, the State Department, the Department of Commerce, all of them have put Chinese defense entities on lists, blacklists, restricted party registers, and the weapons kept moving. An Iranian lawmaker confirmed on September 23, 2025, that HQ-9 systems were being supplied to Iran in, and his words here matter, significant numbers. That is a sitting government official inside the country receiving the weapons, publicly confirming the deal. That is how little Washington's pressure means at this point. Tehran was not even hiding it anymore. But the reach of this invisible shield goes far beyond Iran. In mid-2025, the Middle East Monitor reported that Egypt had acquired the HQ-9B. And then in December 2025, it was confirmed that Egypt had deployed those systems in the Sinai Peninsula, near the Israeli border. Defense analysts called it the most significant Egyptian air defense move since 1979, since the Camp David Accords, since Egypt signed a peace treaty with Israel and dismantled its offensive military posture in Sinai. For Egypt to now deploy Chinese long-range missile systems near that same border is a statement. It is not a declaration of war, but it is a signal. And every intelligence analyst in Tel Aviv and Washington heard it loud and clear. In November 2025, Azerbaijan confirmed it had received a Chinese FD-2000B system, the export version of the HQ-9B. Azerbaijan, a country wedged between Russia and Iran at the crossroads of the Caucasus, with direct influence over key energy corridors running from Central Asia to Europe. Beijing did not put a missile system there by accident. And then there's Morocco. 4 batteries of the FD-2000B, purchased in 2016. 4 batteries sitting at the northwestern corner of Africa, looking out over the Strait of Gibraltar, one of the most strategically important waterways on Earth, where the Atlantic meets the Mediterranean, where NATO's southern flank depends on the ability to move ships and aircraft freely. China has quietly placed its systems at the entrance to that strait. Now step back. Look at the whole map. China itself, layered, overlapping HQ-9 coverage across Beijing, Tibet, Xinjiang, and the South China Sea. Iran, HQ-9B systems integrated into a combined network with Russian S-300s. Egypt, HQ-9B deployed in Sinai. Morocco, FD-2000B at the Strait of Gibraltar. Azerbaijan, FD-2000B in the Caucasus. Pakistan, HQ-9P along the Indian border. Turkmenistan and Uzbekistan, earlier variants covering Central Asia. And that is only the confirmed network. This is not a collection of random arms sales. This is a constellation. A deliberate, patient, decades-long effort to place Chinese-made air defense systems at every strategic choke point and pressure point on the planet. And because every system uses Chinese radar, Chinese command software, Chinese spare parts, and Chinese maintain, every country in that network is permanently connected to Beijing. You cannot remove the system without losing your air defense. You cannot upgrade it without calling China. You cannot even turn it on in the morning without depending on Chinese technology. The Dryad Global Report called this a dependency loop. Once a country is inside it, they are never fully outside Beijing's orbit again. Now here's where Russia enters this story in a way that almost nobody expected. China and Russia have been building their military relationship for 30 years. It started as pure commerce, Russia selling fighter jets and submarines to China in the 1990s when Beijing had money and Moscow desperately needed it. Russia supplied over 100 Su-27 and Su-30 fighter jets, a dozen S-300 batteries, and 12 Kilo-class submarines to China between 1992 and 2014, according to data from the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, cited in the CPA report. That transformed China's Air Force and Navy, and in return Russia got cash. Simple enough. But then something shifted. After 2014, after Russia annexed Crimea and the West imposed sanctions, Moscow lost access to Ukrainian defense factories and Western components. Suddenly, Russia needed China more than China needed Russia. The relationship flipped, and it deepened dramatically after Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022. By 2025, according to the CPA analysis, Beijing had become an irreplaceable enabler of Russia's war effort. Chinese companies were supplying microchips, dual-use electronics, drone components, and propellant technologies to Russian defense manufacturers. Internal documents from Russia's Perm powder plant, obtained through the Black Moon hacktivist group leak in 2025 and analyzed by the Kiev Independent, showed that Chinese specialists from the corporation Norinco were given full access to Russian defense production facilities in 2024 and 2025. They watched, they learned, they took home knowledge of how Russia makes its ammunition and missile propellants, and Russia was giving China something even more valuable in return. In September 2025, CNN reported that leaked documents, verified by the Royal United Services Institute, one of Britain's most prestigious defense think tanks, revealed that Russia had agreed to sell China's People's Liberation Army a comprehensive package of military equipment and training: assault vehicles, anti-tank guns, airborne armored personnel carriers. But more importantly, Russia agreed to train an entire Chinese airborne battalion in advanced air maneuver operations, the kind of operations needed to rapidly seize territory, the kind of operations needed to take an island. RUSI analysts Jack Watling and Oleksandr Daniluk put it in terms that should chill anyone who understands military strategy. Russia, they wrote, is equipping and training Chinese special forces groups to penetrate the territory of other countries without being noticed, offering offensive options against Taiwan, the Philippines, and other island nations in the region. Taiwan, there it is, the word that underlies every military decision Beijing makes. In November 2025, senior Chinese and Russian military officials met in Moscow. General Zhang Yuxia, the first-ranked vice chairman of China's Central Military Commission, the second most powerful military figure in China, sat down with Russia's defense minister, Andrei Belousov. The stated purpose was to strengthen security and defense cooperation. The Russian Defense Ministry's statement specifically mentioned consultations on missile defense and strategic stability. And in their May 2025 joint statement, China and Russia formally called for enhanced cooperation in military technology, expanded joint exercises, and deeper coordination to, in their own words, counter traditional and non-traditional threats effectively. This is not a friendship. This is architecture. Beijing and Moscow are building an alternative global security structure, piece by piece, deal by deal, training exercise by training exercise. And they are doing it without signing a formal alliance, without triggering the legal and political mechanisms that a formal treaty would activate. And here is the brilliant, frustrating, terrifying genius of that approach. A formal military alliance gives Washington something to point at, something to respond to, a target for diplomacy, pressure, sanctions with teeth. But what China and Russia have built is not an alliance in any legal sense. It is a web of interlocking interests so dense and so deep that pulling one thread tightens all the others. The CPA report concluded with a line that cuts straight to the core of this problem. Russia and China cooperate because they have to, not because they trust each other. And that is precisely what makes this impossible to stop. You cannot sanction necessity. You cannot treaty away mutual dependence. Meanwhile, Washington has been trying hard and consistently, and unsuccessfully. In January 2025, the U.S. Department of Defense updated its list of Chinese military companies, a list that now includes 134 entities across aerospace, artificial intelligence, and biotechnology. Companies on this list face restrictions on U.S. defense contracts, export control restrictions, and significant legal and reputational consequences. The Bureau of Industry and Security added 80 new Chinese, Iranian, and Pakistani entities to the entity list in March 2025 alone. The Treasury Department imposed sanctions on Chinese drone companies in October 2024 for supplying attack drones to Russia. U.S. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen warned publicly that Washington would take action against any Chinese companies assisting Russia's military. And in July 2025, U.S. intelligence reports alleged that Chinese companies were shipping engines to Russian weapons manufacturers by mislabeling them to evade detection. Beijing's response was not retreat. It was escalation. On December 26, 2025, China's Ministry of Foreign Affairs issued a formal decree imposing counter-sanctions on 20 U.S. defense companies and 10 senior executives. The list included Northrop Grumman, Boeing, L3 Harris, and Palmer Luckey, the billionaire founder of Anduril Industries, one of the most innovative defense technology firms in the United States. China froze their assets on Chinese soil, banned transactions with Chinese entities, responded to American sanctions with a list of their own, and the weapons kept moving. Because China understood something that Washington is only beginning to fully grasp. Sanctions work when the country you are sanctioning wants access to what you control. When China supplied Iran with HQ-9B systems through an oil barter network, there were no US dollars involved, no SWIFT transactions to block, no American financial institution to threaten. The oil moved on Chinese-flagged tankers, through routes tracked by no one who would report it to Washington. The weapons moved back. And the deal was done in a currency, crude oil, that the U.S. Treasury cannot freeze. The Dryad Global Report warned that this oil for weapons network has become a central artery of Iran's military modernization. And more broadly, it represents a model, a template, for how Beijing plans to build and sustain military relationships entirely outside the reach of Western financial power. Now, to be fully accurate, and this matters, this invisible shield has cracks. The India-Pakistan conflict of May 2025 showed them clearly. The HQ-9B's failure against India's S-400s was not a minor embarrassment. It was a public, documented battlefield proof that China's top export air defense system cannot yet match Russia's best. And that failure has consequences. Countries shopping for air defense will remember what happened near Lahore. Pakistan itself is now questioning whether to replace Chinese systems with Turkish alternatives. The HQ-9B's radar, while powerful on paper, showed vulnerabilities in electronic warfare conditions that modern air forces are equipped to exploit. And the system's performance against slow-moving drones, weapons that even relatively small militaries now operate, was, by multiple accounts, simply poor. China knows this, and China's response tells you everything about how Beijing operates. Rather than defending the HQ-9B, China accelerated development of its replacement. In September 2025, at Beijing's Victory Day parade marking the 80th anniversary of World War II's end, China publicly displayed its entire new generation of air defense systems in one formation for the first time, the HQ-9C, the HQ-19, a system designed to intercept ballistic missiles comparable in concept to America's THAAD, the HQ-20, a new medium-range system that completed its first public live fire test in November 2025, the HQ-22 and HQ-22A, the HQ-29, all of them arranged in a layered formation covering every altitude and every range band from close in to intercontinental. This was not a parade. This was a message. China was showing the world, and the world's potential customers, that the HQ-9B's battlefield struggles were not the end of the story. They were the beginning of the next chapter. Pakistan, still reeling from its air defense collapse, was reportedly offered the HQ-19 as a replacement. If finalized, Pakistan would become the first country outside China to receive a system capable of intercepting ballistic missiles, elevating its strategic deterrence overnight and deepening its integration into Beijing's defense network even further. And here is what is most important to understand about all of this. China is not building an air defense network because it is afraid of being attacked. China's military doctrine, its actual published strategic frameworks, describe air defense as an offensive tool, a shield that enables the sword. When you cannot be hit from the air, you can move on the ground without fear. When your allies cannot be hit from the air, they can act without restraint. The HQ-9 systems on China's artificial islands in the South China Sea do not just protect those islands, they create a bubble of denied airspace that pushes U.S. and allied aircraft further away from the Chinese coast, narrowing the zone where American power can operate effectively. The HQ-9B systems in Iran do not just protect Tehran from Israeli airstrikes, they give Iran the confidence to rebuild its missile production facilities, knowing that the next air campaign will face a more integrated, harder-to-penetrate defense. The HQ-9B systems in Egypt do not just defend Cairo. They alter the strategic calculus for every military planner working the eastern Mediterranean. And the Russia-China training agreement, an entire Chinese airborne battalion learning from Russian combat veterans how to penetrate defended territory, is not a defensive posture. It is preparation for something. The RUSI analysts, the Merrick's researchers, the SEPA strategists, they all point to the same destination, Taiwan, the island that Beijing has claimed for 75 years and never been able to take, the island whose defense depends entirely on the United States being able to project air power across the Pacific fast enough, in sufficient numbers, to stop a Chinese assault before it succeeds. Every layer of Beijing's invisible shield is, ultimately, designed with that scenario in mind. Push American aircraft further from the Chinese coast with South China Sea air defense bubbles, protect Chinese forces from air attack during an amphibious and airborne assault with layered domestic HQ-9 and HQ-19 coverage, train Chinese paratroopers with Russian expertise in rapid penetration operations, lock allies like Iran into a weapons-for-oil dependency that keeps them providing strategic distraction for U.S. attention, sell systems to Egypt, Azerbaijan, and Morocco that create pressure points far from the Pacific, stretching U.S. military planning in every direction simultaneously, and do all of this without signing a single alliance treaty, without giving Washington a legal document to point to, without creating the kind of explicit provocation that would force a U.S. response before Beijing is ready. This is strategy operating at the highest level, and the most sobering part is that it has been working. The United States built the greatest military alliance system in human history after World War II. NATO, the U.S.-Japan alliance, the U.S.-South Korea alliance, AUKUS, the Quad. Decades of treaties, basing rights, shared command structures, interoperable equipment. It took generations and trillions of dollars and the sacrifice of hundreds of thousands of lives to build. China has been assembling a parallel structure, not through treaties, not through alliances, but through technology transfer, weapons sales, oil barter networks, training programs, and infrastructure projects in about 20 years. And it cannot be sanctioned away because the transactions happen outside the dollar system. It cannot be diplomatically unwound because no formal documents were signed. It cannot be militarily countered directly because it exists in the gray zone between war and peace. The U.S. Department of Defense, as of its 2025 annual China Military Power Report, acknowledges that China has the most sophisticated integrated air defense network in the world after Russia, and that China is rapidly closing even that gap. The HQ-9 family alone covers more territory and more threat vectors than any other single nation's air defense system outside of Russia. And that system is now deployed, in various forms, across 6 countries on 4 continents, with more negotiations underway. The invisible shield is no longer just over Beijing. It is over Tehran. It is in the Sinai. It is on artificial islands in the middle of the Pacific. It is being assembled piece by piece across the map of the world. And every time Washington tries to cut one of the threads holding it together, a sanction here, a blacklist there, a diplomatic warning somewhere else, Beijing simply rotes around the obstacle. A new Chinese company that has not yet been sanctioned, a new payment mechanism that does not touch the dollar, a new training program classified deep enough that leaked documents are needed to reveal it. The invisible shield is not a secret because Beijing hides it perfectly. It is invisible because it is everywhere, in plain sight, assembled from pieces that individually look like simple commerce and only reveal their true shape when you step back and look at the whole. And the whole is this. China has built an air defense ecosystem spanning the globe, locked its partners into permanent dependency, trained its own forces for the scenarios that matter most, and done all of it in a way that the most powerful nation on earth cannot effectively stop. That is not an arms deal. That is the reshaping of the world. The question is not whether Washington understands what is happening. The analysts understand it, the think tanks understand it, the military planners understand it. The question, the only question that matters now, is whether the understanding came in time to do anything about it. Because the missiles are already in the ground, the radar is already turning, the launchers are already mobile and ready, and the shield, piece by piece, layer by layer, country by country, was already up.